The first snow of December came early that year, tumbling down from a sky the color of old tin. Hank Rourke sat behind the wheel of his beat-up Ford, the heater wheezing, a paper coffee cup warming his calloused hands. The ad had been sitting in the classifieds for weeks, entire ghost town for sale, $100. As is. Buyer responsible for all property and structures. Most folks would have laughed and moved on, but Hank wasn't most folks. He was a rancher through and through, a man who knew the worth of land, even if the buildings sagged and the paint peeled. Land didn't disappear. Land didn't betray you. Land was something you could work with, something that could be saved. He had no illusions. He figured the place would be nothing more than a few crumbling storefronts, some creaky wooden sidewalks, maybe a leaning church steeple if he was lucky. He imagined tumbleweeds and silence, the kind of silence that makes you hear your own heartbeat. But as his truck groaned up the last hill and the ghost town came into view, he realized two things. First, it was bigger than he'd imagined. Second, it wasn't entirely dead. The main street was still there, lined with faded brick and weather-beaten wood, like a movie set that had been forgotten by time. But what caught his eye wasn't the buildings, it was the faint curl of smoke rising from a chimney halfway down the street. He slowed the truck, tires crunching on icy gravel. People didn't live in ghost towns. That was the point. But smoke meant fire, and fire meant someone had a reason to keep warm. Hank parked in front of what had once been a general store. The sign above it was barely legible, the paint worn to a whisper of its former self. He climbed out, boots hitting the ground with a solid thud, and called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" At first, only the wind answered. Then the door to the general store creaked open. A boy of maybe 12 peeked out, thin as a fence post, with sharp eyes that didn't miss a thing. "You lost?" the boy asked, his voice cautious but not unfriendly. "Nope," Hank said, adjusting his hat. "Just bought this town." The boy frowned. "The whole thing?" "That's right." The door opened wider, and a woman stepped out, mid-30s, with tired lines under her eyes and a scarf pulled tight around her neck. She carried herself with the kind of pride that doesn't break easily, even when life's been hard. "I'm Claire," she said, her tone polite but guarded. "This is my son, Lucas. We've been here a while." Hank felt a prickle at the back of his neck. "I didn't know anyone was living here." "Not many do," Claire replied. "We keep to ourselves. There's no one else around." They stood there in the cold, three strangers bound together by nothing but circumstance. Hank could have told them to pack up and leave. Legally, he had every right. But something in Lucas's eyes, a mix of defiance and desperation, stopped him. "Why here?" Hank asked. Claire glanced toward the mountains. "It's quiet. Lucas can roam without trouble. And, it's home." Home. The word sat heavy in Hank's chest. He knew what it meant to cling to a place because it was the only thing you had left. "All right," Hank said finally. "How about we go inside and talk?" The general store smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. A small wood stove crackled in the corner, its warmth pushing back the winter chill. Shelves that had once held canned goods and flour now stored neatly folded blankets, jars of preserved peaches, and tools patched together from old parts. Hank noticed the details, the care that had gone into keeping the place livable despite the odds. It wasn't a squatter's den. It was a home, plain and simple. Over mugs of instant coffee, Claire told her story. She and Lucas had moved here 5 years ago after her husband, a miner, died in an accident. The house they'd been renting was sold, and with nowhere else to go, she'd brought Lucas to the ghost town her grandfather had told stories about when she was a child. No one wanted it, she said with a small smile. Which meant it was ours. They'd lived quietly, tending a small garden in the summer, hunting in the nearby hills, keeping to themselves. But winters were hard. Supplies ran thin. And she admitted, reluctantly, that she wasn't sure how much longer they could make it. Hank listened, nodding. He thought of his own ranch, miles away, and the long nights when the only sound was the wind rattling the barn door. He thought of losing his wife years ago, and how the empty rooms had seemed to echo louder than any storm. "You could stay," he said suddenly. Claire looked up. "Stay?" "Yeah. I own the town now, sure. But I figure a town's not much without people. We could fix the place up. Bring in supplies. Maybe even get some other folks interested in moving here." Lucas's eyes lit up. "Like make it alive again?" "Exactly." The weeks that followed were a slow thaw, not just of the snow, but of the walls they'd all built around themselves. Hank brought in tools from his ranch, along with extra feed for the old mule Claire kept out back. Lucas proved handy with a hammer, and together they patched up the roof of the old saloon. Claire showed Hank how to can peaches the way her grandmother had taught her. Word started to spread. A friend of Hank's brought an old generator. Another donated lumber. By spring, the ghost town wasn't so ghostly. Windows gleamed with fresh glass. The church bell rang again for the first time in 30 years. But the real change was harder to see. Hank, who had lived alone for over a decade, found himself looking forward to dinner at the general store, where Lucas would chatter about his latest fishing trip and Claire would laugh at Hank's dry jokes. He realized that somewhere along the way, they'd stopped being strangers and started being something else entirely. Family. The turning point came in early summer, when a storm ripped through the valley, tearing down power lines and flooding the low road. Hank's ranch was safe, but the general store took the brunt of it. The roof caved in on one side, soaking everything inside. When Hank arrived, rain dripping from his hat, he found Claire standing in the wreckage, her hands clenched. "We'll fix it," he said firmly. "It's too much," she whispered. "Maybe it's a sign we should go." Hank stepped closer, his voice steady. "You and Lucas aren't going anywhere. This is your home. And I'm not letting you lose it." They worked side by side for days, hauling out ruined furniture, replacing beams, nailing down shingles. Neighbors, people from miles around who'd heard about the town coming back to life, showed up to help. Someone brought food, someone else brought blankets. It wasn't just about saving a building. It was about saving what they'd built together. By fall, the ghost town had a new name among the locals, Haven. The general store was open again, selling homemade jam, fresh eggs, and crafts from nearby ranches. The church held Sunday gatherings. Children's laughter echoed down the main street. One crisp evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the town gold, Claire stood on the porch beside Hank. Lucas was playing with two other boys in the dusty street, their shouts carrying in the cool air. "You know," she said softly, "when you showed up that day, I thought it was the end for us." Hank smiled. "Funny. I thought it might be the start of something." She glanced at him, eyes warm. "Guess we were both right." Years later, people still told the story of how Hank Rourke bought a ghost town for $100 and found a family instead of empty streets. Some said it was luck. Others said it was fate. But Hank knew the truth. Sometimes, you think you're saving a place, and it ends up saving you.